All right, we are very, very thrilled to have Tania.
I want to make sure I got the recorder going.
Tania Casselle. I'm going to find her. All right. She's going to speak about keeping it simple. Sweetheart, the freedom of simplicity. Tania is a writer and editor widely published in books, magazines, newspapers, and online media in the US and Europe. She also works as a book coach and developmental editor for publishers and authors and leads online writing courses with her beloved husband, Sean. She holds a master's in transpersonal psychotherapy and is on the board and faculty of the Sage Institute for Creative Consciousness. And she's going to speak to us about simplicity today. Thank you.
I'll pull it around to the front. How long have I got, Jenny? Like 20 minutes?
No, you got 40 minutes.
40?
Yeah.
Boy, okay. I'm going to speak very slowly today. Are we in? Are we on?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So it's really lovely to be with you, everybody, and also everyone on Zoom. Especially some dear friends from far away as well, it's really lovely to see you join us. So keep it simple, sweetheart, the freedom of simplicity. This talk is really an invitation to explore how simplicity is showing up in our lives right now or not. And I just want to say a little bit about where this is coming from. So back in the 90s, I worked as a transpersonal psychotherapist in London. It was never my full-time job. I always worked, my main work was always in publishing. I was an editor and writer in magazines, but I spent pretty much a day and an evening or two a week working as a psychotherapist in private practice and also in nonprofit, doing pro bono work in nonprofit centers with people that wouldn't otherwise afford therapy. And I started to notice that there were certain times when a lot of my clients would come in and they would be exhibiting not similar content and material, but similar feelings, a similar quality of being that they were bringing into the room. And sometimes that was something that felt good to them, and sometimes it didn't feel so good. So sometimes it might be a lot of agitated energy, which might even manifest to them as anger, or just various different feelings. And the weird thing is that they couldn't kind of place that in their actual material. It seemed to be unrelated to any material that they were actually bringing in, what was going on in their lives, right? So this was curious to me. It was like one after the other coming in with this very similar kind of quality of being and feeling tone and an energy going through them. And so, of course, the first thing you do is due diligence, make sure it's not me projecting onto them, right? That I'm not bringing that into the room and projecting it, or my energetic field is affecting them. And then after that, I would go to supervision. Therapists have a certain number of hours of supervision per client contact hour, and say this. And the veteran therapists that I was seeing for supervision would say to me, "Oh yeah, we all know about that. You won't find it in any textbook. But we all know this. We see this all the time. If you've been around the block a bit as a therapist, you start seeing this, that people come in like this. They're all this way in May and this way in December. There's a certain quality." And they said, "It's just the season. It's just the season." And I found this really intriguing because, no, you didn't find it in any textbook. But it was like kind of like folklore, a known knowledge, a known wisdom that therapists had. So I started looking into this, and it was actually very helpful to my clients because when I could speak to them and we could eliminate, for example, why they were coming in with agitated energy like this, that sometimes turned into a lot of sexual energy or a lot of anger or a lot of something else in, for example, May, we could talk about it and they would think there was something wrong with them. They would pathologize themselves, and we could take it out of that kind of pathologizing. And I could say, something, when we've eliminated all other possibilities, you just might be really in touch with the cycle of the seasons. You might be just really in touch with the natural world. And we may be living in London, and we may have our bright lights that extend our natural daytime through. We can party till midnight, we're not all going to bed with the sun. We may be in this technological world, but we're still children of creation. We're still part of the natural creation. We're still part of part of the natural world and what's going on out there. And this was a huge comfort to a lot of people, that it's like, okay, I can just let it be, right? I can just be with this and understand that there's nothing wrong with me, which is what we tend to do as humans. If there's something that feels uncomfortable, we tend to think it's me, there's something wrong with me. So this just really fascinated me, this idea, and I haven't worked as a therapist for many years now, but it's always stayed with me, and I've carried on kind of like really studying this in myself and other people that I'm around, and reading up and looking at it more. And I'm actually working on a book on this connection that we have to the cycle of the seasons. So that's what I'm speaking from today, is that kind of perspective, which is very much an invitation to become even more conscious and aware of that. And we live in Taos, and I know there's a lot of people that where we live, I think a lot of people are in tune with the way they relate to the season and what's going on out there. So I'm sure many of you will resonate with some of what I'm saying, I hope. And as we are in February, we are going to go with my theme that I have come down with in February, which is simplicity. In all the places I've lived, which is basically Paris, London, and Taos, New Mexico, this final month of winter always feels like such a stripped down and bare month, The trees are fully naked, all their leaves are very long blown away on the wind. We remain surrounded by snow and cold. We have the snow moon in February. And while January did at least have some energy of excitement, people, after all the lights of the midwinter solstice and the Christmas, there's and all the anticipation in January of the new year and the new potentials ahead of us in the new year, February really settles down into this very quiet sense of sobriety. Now, of course, this is completely Northern Hemisphere centric. And also, if you live in Florida, you're going to have a very different experience of some of this. But I'm talking about the temperate climates where I've lived, where you get 4 seasons, and this is what I'm going with. And of course, we also know that many of the spiritual holidays and festivals are very much tied up around those old traditional times of year, turning of the cycle of the seasons and farming and old pagan rituals and such, right? So the word February originally came from the word februar, which is a Roman festival of spiritual purification, where people were ritually washed. The trouble is the word purification and purity are such loaded terms. I feel like there's so many moralistic overtones to them in our culture, and the word has actually almost been weaponized against our very humanity sometimes, this idea of purification, that our very physical embodiment, our sexuality, our humanity, that I prefer to reframe this in a fuller frame and a fuller sense under the word simplicity, which includes that sense of purification in its fullest sense without the moralistic overtones, but also contains other elements connected with the energy of this month. So to me, there is very much an energy in February that is of simplicity, that's very soothing. It's a month that kind of can't be rushed, even though it's a bit of a transitional month, isn't it? It's like we're kind of seeing the onset of spring just around the corner, and there's a temptation to go towards it. In the festival of Imbolc in the Celtic tradition at the beginning of February actually celebrates the impending onset of spring. The word originates from imbolg, which means in the belly. Specifically meaning to the pregnancies of livestock, especially sheep. So it would be the sheep, the ewes that were soon to give birth to the spring lambs, and the wombs of the animals and the womb of the earth preparing for new life, as yet really hidden from our view. So it's kind of there, it's tapping on the surface of the earth, but it's not kind of quite there yet, and the lambs are in the belly. So really, the invitation here is if we are not going to wish away a whole month in our haste to rush headlong into spring, we can take this month to really simplify our lives internally and externally. We don't need to add frills and fuss to anything, just like really slow it down, keep it still, simple, and just resting as patiently, as the seeds underground, as the lambs in the belly of a ewe. And there are various ways to enter simplicity, and I hope that some of these, a couple of ways that I'm going to look at will speak to you. I want to read you a poem. It's called Simplicity is Freedom. It's attributed to Mary Oliver. I'm not 100% convinced because a lot of poems are attributed to Mary Oliver. If you have it in a Mary Oliver book, I'd love to hear, so I know for sure. But it's a lovely poem anyway, so we're going to go with Mary. Simplicity is Freedom. When I moved from one house to another, there were many things I had no room for. What does one do? I rented a storage space and filled it. Years passed. Occasionally I went there and looked in, but nothing happened, not a single twinge of the heart. As I grew older, the things I cared about grew fewer, but were more important. So one day I undid the lock and called the trash man. He took everything. I felt like the little donkey when his burden is finally lifted. Things, burn them, make a beautiful fire, more room in your heart for love for the trees, for the birds who own nothing, the reason they can fly. So I think we all know that feeling when we've had a good decluttering session. And, it's not just the outer space that feels better. It's like internally there's a shift in energy, right? So this leads me into the first part of this exploration, which is letting go. It's a form of letting go. I love that Jenny sang Let It Be, because that's part of also letting go, right? Letting things be. It's kind of a way that we can touch the essence when we let go of all the paraphernalia around. So one way to think about simplicity is to think about what we can do without. What can we remove as a hindrance in our lives? What can we surrender or let go of? What are we holding on to that we've outlived? What is complicating our lives? How can we create more space, So in the poem, Oliver is describing getting rid of physical things that she's hoarded over the years. But probably don't you think that this is also a metaphor for all the intangible things that we've held on to long after they've outlived their usefulness? So that can include our self-identity, the labels and the roles that we play in our relationships that sometimes keep us trapped, our patterns of behavior from like perfectionism, fearfulness, all kinds of patterns of behavior that just don't serve us anymore, really. They served us probably at one time, which is why we did them, but they're not serving us anymore. And what about the things that bring inner and outer conflict into our lives? Our fixed opinions and convictions, our unhelpful circling thoughts that we go round and round with, our expectations and ideas of how things should and shouldn't be, And please be clear, when I say that, I'm not talking about, these are not things that are, I don't consider that it's a pattern of behavior or an opinion or a preference to hold up that we don't hurt other people. Other people should, there's craziness going on out there, and some of that we need to have strong opinions about, and we need to protect people who could be hurt. I'm not talking about that. I really am talking about that kind of inner process and that inner identities, opinions and fixed beliefs that we sometimes have. And I've noticed for myself that when those things are arising in me, often they come with a sense of constriction. It may be very subtle. It's a physical constriction, a tightening, shoulders, mouth, jaw, or it may just be a sense of inner clenching in some way. I'm holding on to this idea for dear life and nobody's going to get it away from me, that kind of thing. So I think that's really helpful if we notice that and can tune into the constriction and the things that trigger the constriction, so that we can see if there's any useful information in that. Maybe there isn't, but maybe there is. So is there anything there that we can let go of or release when we notice that constriction? So the invitation is really to consider what we no longer need, release it, in the spirit of living a simpler life. This is adopting an inner stance towards simplicity. Even if you don't want to throw out a lot of things at home, this is really, it all comes from the inner stance. The outer and the inner work together all the time. So this is about the inner stance, so that we can really relish the truly precious things that nourish us every day. In the Christian contemplative tradition, we talk about kenosis, that kind of, in the simplest way, the kind of emptying out. In the Buddhist context, we talk about letting go of attachments or clinging. And of course, Lent would be starting a bit later this year, which is a time that some people use to give up to kind of relinquish some kind of treat, luxury, little vice, pattern of behavior or something that they want to kind of relinquish and let go of in their spiritual journey. If all this talk about giving things up sounds a bit frugal and grim, well, it's true that the month of February does have a bit of a historic connotation of frugality. Just think about it. Back in the day, before we, could go to the supermarket, as our root cellars would be running pretty low by now after all the foods of the harvest had been used up. Another name for the moon this month is hunger moon, which kind of says it all. A medieval English term for February, and I noticed Carmen Acevedo Butcher, who is a wonderful translator and writer and translator of The Cloud of Unknowing, for example, and speaks medieval English, and all these old forms is going to kind of like know how to pronounce this better than me, but a medieval English term for February was kale monat, which means cabbage month. That sounds fun, doesn't it? I'm a vegetarian and even I don't like the idea of cabbage month. It doesn't sound so much fun. But when food was running low by now, all that was left in the cellar, was cabbage lives a long time. If you've ever had one in the fridge, they last. You're going to eat me one day. So the cabbage is all that they had left. So there is that slight air of frugality by this time of year. But, we're not here obviously asking you to give up your favorite treats and just eat cabbage for the rest of the month. We're really talking about releasing the things or the patterns of behavior that weigh us down, the things that do not spark joy, as the author Marie Kondo put it. Or as my wisdom teacher, Cynthia Bourgeault, writes, kenosis is not the same as renunciation. Renunciation implies a subtle pushing away. Kenosis is simply the willingness to let things come and go without grabbing on. Its flow is positive and fundamentally creative. And I think any writers or artists in the room probably can relate to that. In the flow of creation, we let a lot of things come and go. And to some degree, we let go of the final creation too. It has its own life as it goes off out into the world, right? So this sense of letting go is actually it's not just all giving up and it going. It creates space for something new, and there's a constant ebb and flow of this. So really the kind of things that I'm suggesting as questions to ponder on, that's worth thinking about is there a burden that you'd like to put down? Is there a thing that you'd like to release, whether it's external or an internal piece? And then another theme that fits into me to simplicity is the sense of kind of entering the mystery of not knowing, which is also called beginner's mind. I sometimes hesitate to use the phrase beginner's mind because I almost feel sometimes the minute I say beginner's mind, I see people turn, I know all about beginner's mind. Oh yeah, I know that. I've done it myself, honestly. I've noticed it myself. When teachers talk and they say beginner's mind, there's a part, oh yeah, I've done so much work on beginner's mind. It's so funny. It's just like this piece that can come up, so ironically. So, but anyway, I quote here from Kailash Satyarthi, the Indian human rights activist and Nobel Peace Prize winner. He said, "Childhood means simplicity. Look at the world with a child's eye. It is very beautiful." Now, I know that childhood has not been simple for all of us. It certainly wasn't for me. So, but even within sometimes the troubling childhoods that people have had, we can usually find and remember and recall some gem, some little trinket of a memory that summons up that sense of simplicity to us. So, for example, for me, I remember with my mother, we would lie on the lawn in summer, and she would hold a buttercup under the little golden flower under my chin, and I'd hold one under hers. And if you could see the yellow light reflected on your chin, it meant that you liked butter. So we'd hold it up, and I'd say, "Do you like butter?" and put it under her chin, and we always like butter. I tell you, our family definitely likes butter. And another one was walking with my grandfather to the car after we visited, and for some reason these memories always come to me as winter. It's always icy, that iron cold smell in the air that you get in deep winter. And we're walking down, and he's wearing his kind of like rough jacket that I can feel as I kind of nuzzle up. I would have been like 4 or 5 against him, and he'd walk us to the car, and the rest of my parents and my grandmother would fall away, and it was just me and my granddad. This is the memory. It's such a simple memory, and it means so much to me. And we'd get to the end of the path, and there would be a new moon. So often, there seems to be just so many new moons in my childhood. And there was a new moon, and he would turn the silver over in his pocket and say, "Oh, it's a new moon, let's tatty head." He called me tatty head. "Let's turn the silver over," because it went back to an old kind of tradition, I suppose, that silver is associated with the moon, and the new moon is associated with new potential, new beginnings. So you turn the silver over to turn your fortune over and keep aligned with the new moon for abundance and goodness in the coming month. And it was such a simple memory, and it comes back to me so often when I smell that iron cold, icy smell on a winter's night. And then he'd give me a silver sixpence to go and buy sweeties, or a threepence when I was very small, which is very old money in England, and so it shows how old I am, but he'd give me a silver sixpence. So that's some very simple childhood memories that when I bring them, I feel the glow, that goodness filling me inside. It's like nourishment I can eat. So I really invite you to think also about some of those simple moments as well in your life, and perhaps back to childhood, where it's just purely untainted. It's purely untainted by anything but a sense of goodness and love and connection. And really, it's fascinating to me, at what point did we stop seeing the world through the eyes of a child? At what age were we? When did a different kind of reality crash in and start complicating things? When do we still, because I think we do still, most of us still sometimes see the world with that innocent, open, childlike gaze. It's still there for us, and we know that sometimes we're just on a walk or we're doing, and suddenly it's that simple, just all over again. So the quote from Kailash Satyarthi reminds us to sometimes experience the world as we did when we were young and unburdened by all our to-do lists, and before our world became so familiar, we stopped seeing it anymore in some ways. This is similar to the Buddhist concept of beginner's mind, when we arrive at every new experience or every new situation without any preconceived ideas. We see everything and everyone anew. The famous quote by Suzuki Roshi in his book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, is, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." So for a creative life, we really need to experience things in a fresh way without the baggage of preconceived ideas, because otherwise we're just copying something, we're not creating anything new. For a happy life, our relationships also really benefit from beginner's mind. When we don't make assumptions about others, no matter how well we know them, no matter how long we've been married to them, it's so easy, isn't it? We don't see them as they are now. It's all the past experiences coming. Can we sometimes just stop and see a grandchild or a partner or an old friend, just like see them, and it's like, hey, I'm just meeting you anew today for the first time. We're both new people today, and and just take that moment to see, how does that feel qualitatively any different to us? So for a simple life, we're not making any assumptions about them already. So for a simple life, can we experiment with seeing through the eyes of our child self and consciously adopting beginner's mind as we go about our day? Actually, when we finish today, I really invite you to go home, and as you walk through the threshold of your home, see it as if you've never been there before. Just like say, hey, I'm home, wow. And just notice, I know that there's artwork I don't notice, because I'm just so used to living with it. That's why it's helpful to move artwork around, I find sometimes, because I see it again. Plants, it's just like, just walk in and see it, and just see if how that feels to see it with that fresh eyes. When we create more space in our lives, in our physical space or our heart minds, we create space to invite something really wonderful and life-affirming to enter. And of course, the Buddha's famous teaching, the Four Noble Truths, explains that so much of our suffering is caused by clinging to those attachments, as we talked about before. And of course, we're still going to want to acquire objects. It's in our human nature. Of course, we're still going to want to prefer to have things one way or the other. But really, one way to just simplify so deeply is to relinquish our attachment to our preferences, the ways that we always want things to run. And again, I'm not talking about certain things happening in the world. There are certain basic human standards of we don't hurt people, we don't harm people. But if I'm not so fixed on having every detail exactly as I want it to be, exactly as how I want and when I want, then life is immediately just simpler and more at ease, you know? There's just less resistance, less friction going on, and it's an immediate simplification. So easing that grip and being less fixed about what we want and don't want really helps. And, I'm sure many of you are working with these kind of thoughts already, and if not, give it a try. But helps us realize that our true happiness doesn't really rely on us getting our way about any given object or situation at all. It really isn't. That's not where our happiness comes from, and there's a huge freedom in that. So, but in the spirit of keep it simple, sweetheart, when I'm teaching writing classes, writers have a great propensity for complicating things. Gee willikers, do they complicate things? Rather than just tell the stories like, how can I do a fancy structure, or how can I do this and do that, and I see it in myself. And the reason I've learned so many lessons about simplicity is because I'm the queen of overcomplicating things. You give me something simple to do, and by golly, I'm going to make it hard for myself, right? And everyone around me, My husband is keeping a very poker face at this moment. But we so often tend to complicate things before we begin, as if somehow it isn't hard. If it isn't hard work, it isn't valid in some way. It's almost like there's a virtue in making things hard, as if we haven't earned it, if we haven't suffered a little bit on the way or something. Please, I'm not the only one in this, right? That recognizes this. There's this overcompensation that can happen. We have to complicate it in some way. So we over-research, over-prepare, and those kind of things. When we're in the Tao, kind of in the flow, it isn't hard, it does flow. By complicating things, we kind of take ourselves out of that stream, that river of flow of the Tao. And so I have had to work with this very hard to notice, am I really making this harder for myself than it needs to be? Because then I feel I've earned it, or I'm worthy in some way, So my motto now, that from this hard-won experience with writers that I work with, is to say, listen, just do the simplest thing first. To write your book in the simplest way possible, and then if it doesn't work, then complicate it, right? Do it the other way around. Just start with the simplest way, then complicate it if that doesn't work out. And that works for a lot of people, because it takes a huge burden of, I don't have to do a fancy structure, and I don't have to be so clever and about this, that, and the other. So again, the question here is to ask, how do you complicate? How do I complicate things? How do I keep things simple? So in some ways we will keep things simple, in some ways we'll complicate them. And how do I notice the difference? And is there a difference in my experience and how I feel in myself when I complicate things or when I keep them simple? It's just an exploration, really. And, choice paralysis is a real thing. The more choices we have about the ways to do things, this is part of complicating it, the more cognitive dissonance we have, because it increases the chance that as the decision maker, we've made the wrong decision, right? You've got you go online to buy something, and an hour later, you're so overwhelmed by all the choices there, you don't buy anything, right? Because you're so scared, oh my gosh, weighing up the free shipping and the this and the that and the other, and everything. It's like, I might make the wrong decision. As if there is a wrong decision, when you're buying a tablecloth. How wrong can that decision be? So we don't end up buying anything, but it's like literally our brains cannot compute all of these choices and options that we have. The more decisions we have to make, the more mental energy it takes up, and we only have a limited supply of that. And that kind of choice overload also reduces our ability to make a good decision. We do much better when we make a choice out of 2 or 3 things than out of 10 things. And our satisfaction with the final decision is better when we have fewer choices. So that's just one way that we can think about, okay, am I complicating my life here? And am I having choice paralysis? Am I setting this up with too many options? What about if I just brought it down to these 2 options? Okay, and I'll choose between them. See how that feels, see how the constriction and release feels in our body and in our energy at that point. And I just want to finish on one thing that I find absolutely delightful. How many people here enjoy looking at, like, this time of year, like I said at the beginning, the trees, the leaves have all long blown away at this point, right? Our trees have been bare for months. How many people enjoy looking at the naked trees and the silhouettes of the trees against the sky? Okay, good. Or keep doing it and keep doing it more, because I've discovered some research that said that this simple blessing that we have of the naked trees is actually really good for us. It actually reduces our stress. It turns out, all those naked branches and all the tangled twigs, they create a natural fractal pattern. A fractal pattern being when one part of the pattern is the same as the whole, right? The two are the same. It repeats in a certain way. And research shows that looking at fractal patterning can reduce stress and mental fatigue by up to 60%. So we can all really make the most of keeping it simple, sweethearts, and going and looking at the trees as we go home, and know that we are actually helping to reduce our own mental stress. And I wish you all much joy in exploring how you're going to keep it simple, sweethearts, for the rest of this month. And I'd love to hear any experiences later that you have in any of this and how you respond. Thank you.
Just a question, Tania. I was really intrigued by your clients or your patients or whatever you work with, coming to know that the seasons may be affecting their moods and their actions. What percentage would you say actually believe that and their moods improved?
I would say that because it wasn't every single person coming in, it was a lot. It was enough for me to notice it, right, in the first place when people came in. So we're talking about when people would come in as clients in psychotherapy. I think what happened is because the trouble is the thing that was causing them the suffering wasn't, for example, the sense that they got a lot more sexual energy or creative energy or anger coming up. The thing that caused them suffering was not that experience itself. It was the ideas they were overlaying on it, that there was something wrong with them for that. Or why am I feeling this? Why am I having all these sexual thoughts? Why is there, what is wrong with me? So that was where the suffering came in. So the minute, if I said this to them, if they weren't into that, if they thought, it doesn't make sense, fine, I'm not going to impose that on anybody. It's an invitation again. But a lot of people, they did immediately like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. Yeah, I get it. So immediately the suffering and the discomfort around that overlay of thinking, what's wrong with me, dissipated. And then we could talk about strategies of how they could manage their anger, or how they could put that into something creative, or go away with their girlfriend for a really good weekend, or whatever. So it did help in that way, because it takes away that tendency we have as humans to think that whatever we're experiencing is something wrong with us.
Thank you.
I'd like to share a thought that you're associating February with frugality, and it's only got 28 days.
Right, it's a thin month, yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. February only has 28 days, it's true. Most years. So that's me, thank you.
Thank you,
everybody.
Tania.
Thank you.